There's a lot of kids out there who need your help, and a donation to St. Jude could potentially save them. Link to my fundraiser is in the description.
All you need to do is tell me where the Temple of Gaia is.
We're not telling you anything!
I'm going to let you in on a little something I want to do throughout this year. While I do plan to do something big for the day my channel turns 10 years old, which will be in July of this year, at sporadic points, I want to celebrate that milestone through videos that more so have a connection to my channel's history in some form. Looking back through a lot of my computer documents and thinking back to my time as a video maker in the early to mid 2010s, there's a lot I can make work. I'm still considering reviving old ideas I had in mind years ago but never got around to doing, but today, I would like to give one of my first countdowns a remake. To those who don't know or want to refresh, I made a countdown on my favorite video game villains as my second countdown all the way back in 2013. And it's definitely a video by 2013 me. And there's a large difference in game and video experience between 2013 me and 2023 me, so I thought it'd be fun to go at it again. Funny enough, this was also something I wanted to do years prior, even having a draft that's almost 3 years old by this point. For rules, I was initially going to leave off every villain from the original video, but since it's pretty ancient and there's more I could say about them, I'll allow them to come back, if I feel like including them. I'll also mostly be focusing on what exactly makes them generally credible as a villain more than a character, only bringing up normal character traits if it helps my point. If I was going off pure character, the order would be far different. And for another thing, I'm going to try to be rather diverse with my villain selection, allowing those who are generally more complex than your average baddie, and the monsters with unimaginable control and power, as well as throw in a good old mustache-twirling cartoony baddie for good measure, all to avoid things getting old. Alright, I think it's time for this topic to take its revenge! In terms of the aforementioned cartoony villains, I had a lot to choose from. I've come to enjoy them a lot more over time, because depending on the writing, they can bring a level of charm that's hard to replicate. Heck, a lot of games have played around with the archetype, adding more to their character, or just making them look cooler or smarter. And I've always loved how the Eggster does it.
Eggman!
It did pain me to leave a few of the others off, but there's a ton about Dr. Eggman that makes me prefer him above all the rest. He's incredibly entertaining as a character, with the numerous ways he treats most of his robots working for him with little respect, but as a villain, he can be taken seriously if he has managed to skew the cards in his favor from right under the hero's noses. It's impressive just how far he's willing to go in order to build an entire empire, even if it means imprisoning wildlife, or going as far as to awaken ancient deities to assist him in some form, even if that one sometimes blows up in his face. That's especially really dangerous when the desire is formed from an overall love of science from his late grandfather and an enjoyment of telling other people what to do. There are a ton of creations I can praise for how well they show the amount of efforts he's willing to put into his plans, as well as this obsession to beat Sonic, but I especially want to talk about how near seamlessly his plans can surely end up going when he puts his mind to them. The two best examples I can think of are in Adventure 2 and Unleashed. In the latter, he manages to get Sonic to use the Chaos Emeralds and think that he's won, only to bait him into a trap, drain the Chaos Emeralds of their power, and then break the planet. Did Eggman figure Sonic would bring the Emeralds and only pretend to be scared to get him right there? If so, that's actually amazingly clever. And in Adventure 2, he predicts that Sonic and his friends would trick him with the fake Emerald for the Eclipse Cannon, and then makes a risky bet that someone would tell him, and then Tails tells him, unaware of what Eggy was planning. And if Sonic needs that big of a stretch in order to not die, I think that made Eggman look even more credible. I would very much not like to play chess with him. Eggman as a whole is everything that I love to see out of a villain who embraces how evil he is and just refuses to stay down. I love how deeply embraced his sole desire is. He actually isn't above letting some good in him show, as he does try to help when the situation calls for it, and need I mention his growing bond with Sage from Frontiers, and in the end, I just love watching him. I never get tired of knocking him into oblivion because deep down I know Baldy McNosehair will absolutely find his way back. I'm still not insanely versed in the Persona series, as I've only played 5 Royal and 5 Strikers, and I have 4 gold in my Steam backlog longing to be played, but I think the variety of villains I've encountered from the first two alone is definitely notable. I really do enjoy most of them, even if they get only one chapter to shine, because they make the most of how they're set up, and are just entertaining to watch and fun to take down. And then there's this guy, Masayoshi Shido. He might be on the same level as the others in the eyes of the Phantom Thieves, but in terms of narrative as a whole, he's basically front and center at the game's central conflict. Right as soon as the game starts, it already tells you that he's already worked his way up to a state of power that makes him seem untouchable. Joker literally gets framed for a crime he did not commit, all because Shido had the power to say so. But to make matters worse, he's already planted the seeds elsewhere to build up his eventual goal of running for Prime Minister and reforming all of Japan as he sees fit. He's got 2 moles financing him, more in the police force affecting the general work environment for them, 1 in a school that probably promoted a toxic atmosphere that made it easy for Kamoshida to slip in and do his Kamoshida thing, and I forgot to mention that he's got his own assassin for Metaverse missions, killing off potential opponents by fully executing their shadows, basically beings they vision themselves as, including Futaba's mother and Haru's father. So everything in the story always traces back to him, and it's astonishing just what he's willing to do for his approval ratings, especially since he's able to go further and pin the death of Haru's dad on the Phantom Thieves. He's an absolute scumbag of a human being, but the fact that he just accepts that and can act as the morning and evening star and convince the public he's absolutely trustworthy, on top of adapting to any alterations to his goals when he notices that something's amiss, definitely make him such a fun antagonist and an overall satisfying force of power to overcome and see get retribution. Stepping too deep into your own pride will absolutely be your undoing. The Tales series is definitely a fun one to bring up regarding its villains. With such character-driven narratives, there's definitely a ton to discuss on most of them, of different varieties too. But whenever they decide to write a villain who isn't truly a mystical being at their core, but rather driven to be the villain because of traumatic experience, and their desperation to undo it or destroy something, I feel that Hook is almost always done well, and those characters usually end up being some of my favorites in the game. Nowhere do I feel that shines more than with Vanda Stelka Musto Fende, or as you know him as, Van Grants. At first, this guy generally seems like a really nice mentor character, as he pretty much taught Luke everything he knows with a sword, and it becomes jarring once Tyr enters the fray and tries to assassinate him, thus kickstarting the plot. But there's definitely a lot more to Van than meets the eye. See, the general population of Aldrent, the planet that acts as the general setting of Abyss, has embraced what's known as Yulia's Score, a prophecy meant to predict what will happen to the planet over the course of the next 2,000 years. Part of that said that Van's home island of Hod would be destroyed, and lo and behold, that actually happened. Yeah, an entire tragedy happened in accordance to something people have basically accepted as their religion, leading to casualties for little reason. Now that I say that, there's a lot of different directions that you can take that, and Van's got every right to hate it. But the way he chooses to go about it is ultimately what makes him the villain. Trying to discredit that prophecy and get an entire planet to leave it behind does require extreme measures, but tossing aside every living being and every landmass on the planet and replicating it all so that they could all be free from a bunch of words one person wrote is a really extreme measure, even really twisted. While Van undoubtedly let his goal of overthrowing the Score get to him, he never truly sacrificed all of his humanity. He was able to win the trust of the Order of Lorelei in order to amass power, and was able to gather 6 different people who also hated the Score, who ended up becoming the God Generals. That's honestly what I love about Van. He still maintains a strong sense of self, even towards the main party, even after showing his true colors, but he still proves to be a threat that needs to be taken seriously. It's things like this that make Van a really three-dimensional villain, and a great contributor to Abyss's overall themes of establishing oneself in spite of everything going against you. He's ultimately human at the end of the day, and he knows this, but despite what his goals ultimately were, he always fought for what he believed in. We've gotten through 3 entries so far, 2 of which not being commonly talked about among others from what I've seen, and now we've come to arguably one of the most iconic villains in gaming history, and one some people still find things to be intrigued by all these years later. The Great Gerudo King, and wielder of the Triforce of Power, Ganondorf. This was one entry I thought about bringing back from my original list, and I went through with it because upon learning more about who he truly is, and why he's valued among other players, I find him far more complex and dangerous than I did before. He was initially born into the Gerudo tribe, which mostly comprised of females that only had one male born every century, but throughout his training in the art of magic, and how he grew into a position of power within Hyrule to be recognized by the king, he's always had his goals set on the Triforce. But he didn't just demote himself to be an everyday thief, he's shown to be an expert in combat to the point where nobody can truly phase him, only through sacred means like the almighty Master Sword. But even then, he's also shown to be very intelligent, adapting to the current circumstance, and playing things to his advantage. That moment where he actually did seize the Triforce of Power in Ocarina of Time proves that this guy earned his position as a king of evil. We even get to see more sides of him, from being portrayed as actually kind of sympathetic in Wind Waker, though not overly, to being so far consumed by his rage and his power to the point where he spends another timeline as the giant boar Ganon, or living embodiment of Calamity in Breath of the Wild's case. I think what gets people about Ganondorf is that he's basically an embodiment of evil that we enjoy overcoming, one who's defined by malice and won't stay down until he sees his plans through, and not in the same way we enjoy seeing villains like Eggman come back, more so in a way where him coming back is more of a "oh crap, you're back" moment! Even in death, or through a supernatural prison, Ganondorf finds the courage, the wisdom, and the power to lay siege once more. And what gets me even further is that no matter what, it's always him. There's not a new Ganondorf born every game like there is a new Link or a new Zelda. It's always the same person who gives rise to new heroes and new stories. So in a way, a lot of this could mean that most of the time, new heroes are born out of all the new Links we get to know to oppose the might of one person. That's not just amazing, that alone gives Ganondorf the recognizability, the adoration, and the power he truly deserves. Sly Cooper is another fun series to talk about in terms of its villains. Every game has a good amount of them, and almost every one of them is full of character and are fun to mess with. I would have liked to have found more of an opportunity to talk about Dr. M or Penelope, since they're among some of my favorites, but come on, at the end of the day, Clockwork is superior. It's funny, because Clockwork is among the villains to have the least amount of screen time in the series, only being mentioned in flashbacks and pictures, and fully physically appearing at the end of the first game. But man, did the writers know how to make the best of it. At first, he generally appears to be the kingpin of the Fiendish Five, the ones who stole the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus and killed Sly's parents, but he's actually been the biggest threat to the Cooper bloodline for who knows how long. His jealousy and hatred for the notoriety the Cooper family built up grew so huge that he committed himself to wiping them all out for his own gain. That hatred grew so much that he was able to make it his entire life force and fully mechanize himself, thus allowing him to live for thousands of years. A being that lived through hate. That's really cool, yet incredibly terrifying. And terrified is honestly how Clockwork makes you feel. His presence made me feel like an insignificant little ant, and that one action could literally lead to my life ending. Even now, just being in his presence gives me the chills. But another good kicker to this is that even when he's ripped apart at the end of the first game, with his consciousness not intact, he could still be a threat. In Sly 2, various parts of his body are used for nefarious means by the Claw Gang, and they work well for their operations individually. Yeah, that's a problem. But to make matters even worse, when the Cooper Gang defeats the newly built Clockwork body, it actually collapses and cripples Sly's companion Bentley for life. So even with Clockwork long gone, he inadvertently won and destroyed the Cooper legacy. I mean, sure, they got back together in the next game, but the damage Clockwork did to them was already done. It's insane just how far a disdain for something can just drive him into living for so long that he accomplishes his goal in death. I can think of no other words to describe Clockwork other than a complete monster. But dang, did he truly leave his mark. Oh hey, it's a series I don't talk about very often. I'm still not well versed in Ace Attorney, having only played the 3DS entries, but despite that, there's plenty of villains to talk about. From who I went up against, I can certainly say I really enjoyed most of these crooked criminals. I mean, from the domestic cousin of the engineer from Team Fortress 2, a smile that everyone can trust, Jesus with the guitar, and somebody who absolutely runs a propaganda show, you cannot convince me otherwise. Who do I talk about? Well, I have to give it to the one Dual Destinies not only saved for last, but built a lot of its story and character arcs around him. I give you the Phantom. When thinking about it more, I'm honestly surprised the Phantom turned out to be as effective as he was, considering we don't know anything about his background, who he works for, or even who he truly is. He basically dropped any semblance of a human personality in favor of just becoming a blank slate that can mimic any human near flawlessly, and carry out his work that way. But while this would be a negative given that he has so little personality in a visual novel, he's actually able to take that and turn it on its head. As said earlier, he's the direct catalyst that acted as the building blocks for several character arcs, Athena being traumatized over the death of her mother and her involvement in the aftermath, Simon becoming a convict taking the fall for Athena, and Apollo wanting to lawfully find the murder of his friend, Clay Taryn. But rather than stop there, he's able to further manipulate events from behind the scenes in the guise of the justice-loving detective, Bobby Fulbright.
What?
Game, you're telling me that the dude who does anything in the name of justice, the dude who'd get along with Arthur from Violent Fates and always serve justice with them, the dude with this face, is a serial killer? A terrorist? Yes, and a good one at that. He's been pulling a lot of the strings the whole time, disposing of any evidence that could incriminate him, possibly killing countless others, and even manipulating evidence to incriminate others of his work, even going as far as to turn Apollo against Phoenix and Athena for a moment. I really can't say that the Phantom is truly like any other Ace Attorney villain I've seen yet. It's horrifying how well he's able to control himself, and how well he's able to blend into his surroundings by his superb acting. He's elusive, but at the same time he can strike at any moment, and the impact will definitely be traumatic. There's a ton of ways you can take with the direction the writers took with him, and at the end of the day, he's truly a dark figure you definitely don't want to be lurking in the shadows nearby. One reason why I've truly grown to love Xenoblade Chronicles' story is how it actually managed to make villains of different archetypes play a part in the conflict without it feeling too crowded. Some more than others, sure, but I truly do appreciate the effort. But I would love to sing my praises towards the one they initially set up as the main antagonist, Egil. Being the one who has essentially been pulling the strings from the war between the Bionis and the Mechonis after the Titans themselves initially clashed, quite literally, and the one largely responsible for creating a small number of other antagonists in the game, by kidnapping select Toms and putting them in face Mechon, mind you, Egil's already in a position of power beyond what those residing on Bionis can handle. Even if he isn't introduced until near the second half of the game, his power can be felt in all the attacks he's orchestrated, even ones where the player doesn't know about him. But beyond his control, Egil's a very tragic and emotionally broken individual. He wants a peace between the races of Bionis and Mechonis, just like everyone else does, but Zanza, the god of the Bionis, in his effort to destroy and recreate the world, attacked and wiped out the grand majority of his people, the Machina, through the body of one of his friends. So after that, what was a very nice man became a mere shell of vengeance and malice bent on eradicating Zanza through any means. And sadly, that is to kill all life on Bionis to weaken him. See, ether is the foundation of all life on the Bionis, and when anything that is created from it dies, the dissipating ether will eventually return to its god, aka Zanza, renewing his power, and the cycle essentially repeats. Egil himself doesn't hate any normal beings that come from the Bionis, but cutting off that ether supply before the moment the Bionis awakens will require a mass genocide. Egil himself knows how tragic this is for so many people. He knows what he's doing is reprehensible, but according to him, until the cries of those people are silenced, he is deaf to all else. I can't really help but feel sorry for him, because he lost so much in that one invasion, and truth be told, I truly did want to reason with him, and hopefully find that solution where everyone can be happy, as does Shulk, because you know, he lost a lot in that attack on Colony 9 too. So in the end, even if he doesn't take the role as the final antagonist, Egil not only made the most of the story he was given, but he ultimately proved to be an effective tragic villain that I was happy to see redeemed. As time has gone on, I've grown appreciation towards villains who have been created or driven to do their deeds because of how deeply flawed or immensely screwed up the general society of the game has become. Part of that is because I've become a lot more aware of things going on in these dark times, but even so, I find it fascinating to learn about those who have caved into despair and try and reform society despite the methods they use. Van and Egil are two of my favorite examples, but I feel this one, while it's arguably some of the most spelled out, arguably takes it and executes it in such a good way that the game itself gives you the choice to join her cause. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the leader of the Black Eagles House, Emperor of Adrestia, and one of my favorite characters in Fire Emblem Three Houses, and all of Fire Emblem, Edelgard von Resvelg. I was really torn as to whether or not to include Edelgard on here, because of how morally gray the conflict of Three Houses generally is, but when looking more at the bigger picture and how it could branch off, not to mention how deeply screwed things can get when you really think about it, I think talking about Edelgard is definitely warranted here. You're either with her in Crimson Flower, or against her in the other routes, and her actions become the focus once her motives are clear as day. I was interested in teaching the Black Eagles first, because I wanted to see what they had to offer more than the Blue Lions and the Golden Deer. I was already charmed by Dorothea, and others like Petra, Linhardt, and yes, even Edelgard, I wanted to know more of. But little did I know that Ada here was secretly planning an uprising against all of Fodlan. I mean, with her manipulating people who actually tortured her as a child into carrying out her goals, legitimately accepting any life that others are willing to lay down for her, and turning into a complete monster in Azure Moon, I'm appalled at how far Edelgard is willing to go to burn everything to ash. But at the same time, it's sad just how emotionally broken she truly is, and in hindsight, I truly do feel her motives. See, a major part of Fodlan is cress, marks that carry on through bloodlines, which quite literally make nobles stronger than commoners. That already raises a red flag, but it gets worse with all the discrimination against those without cress, and especially when the head of the Church of Seros, Archbishop Rhea, mostly just has this system in place in order to find a vessel to resurrect her mother. So with the one in charge of the continent keeping everything stuck in the past, all because her mom died, I say that Edelgard has every right to call the system out for what it truly is. I love every moment where she lets her more human traits shine through, whether they be lighthearted or more melodramatic, like her not actually turning a blind eye to those who died for her, and I know that despite some horrific acts, there's always someone truly nice underneath there. Even more so in Crimson Flower, since your help does teach her to be more peaceful when it comes to certain situations, and you could technically debate that most of the bloodshed that happens in that one mostly comes from other people in higher positions, like Rhea completely going off the deep end. But between how she carries out her goals with all the blood, flames, and ruin left behind, regardless of route, and how cunning she truly is as an emperor, she's not only earned being called a fantastic character, but also a fantastic villain. Admirably done, Emperor Edelgard. You really won me over. So, you're back. Yeah, if I was going to allow previous candidates back on this list, one of the biggest challenges would be to figure out what I would do with my original number one. I mean, he's already one of my favorite characters in video games, and I can think of several reasons for him to take the top. I even wanted to at some point before settling on someone else. But the demotion doesn't change the fact that I absolutely adore this absolutely glorious show stealer. In a game that pretends the fourth wall is a myth, Hades cares so little about what's going on around him, and just messes with stuff for his own amusement. Not only is he responsible for some of the funniest moments in the game, but he makes it abundantly clear just how little he understands apathy, and completely understands amusement. His fake wish from Chapter 10 is clear definitive proof of this. Like, it's kind of amazing just how the story escalates with a little build-up. But this nihilism is also proved in just how everything is already laid out in his favor. With the conflict that's caused among humankind, Hades is basically forming his army no matter what, with all the souls he's collected, so he's basically got control of the plot right off the bat. But between Medusa being brought back several times over, and all the other minions that came with her carrying out his mission, the wish seed being fake in order to persuade other humans into killing each other, and getting Viridian and the forces of nature to enter the fray and make things worse, which inadvertently released the Chaoskin, causing Palutena to get possessed and attack humans for a time, everything that goes wrong here, you can totally blame on him. And he doesn't care. He's proud of the bloodshed and calamity that's ensuing, because that just means his army can grow bigger, or he can nourish himself if he's in the mood for it, and he can just sit back and laugh at other characters' misfortunes. While the rank in my original video didn't exactly reflect on why Hades was my favorite villain at that time, or one of my favorites now for that matter, I think I have a better grasp as to why I love him as a villain, and possibly what my younger self saw in him. Hades is completely different to what's truly happening, unless it specifically caters to something he likes. He treats the entire planet as nothing more than his playthings, and makes others feel completely insignificant. But from where he's standing, there really isn't that much standing in his way, since his method to succeed is basically already laid out for him, and it would take a lot to stop it. And that's why he's truly an evil that I love to overcome, and love to hear speak, whenever he decides to. Well, we're almost done, so let's talk about some honorable mentions. Dr. Nefarious from the Ratchet & Clank series. In hindsight, I love him for a lot of similar reasons I love Dr. Eggman, and while I ultimately prefer Eggy, Nefarious has plenty of charm to him and is someone I love to see repeatedly come back. Bowser from the Mario series. I love how well they nail him being an evil you can have fun with and take seriously when needed. He can be a beast if he's written well. Master Xehanort from the Kingdom Hearts series. I love how commanding he can truly be, and I feel Birth by Sleep was the best portrayal of his character, especially when it comes to his association with Terra. Ray Fadler from Uncharted 4. It's impressive how they made this guy both seem like a good equal to Nate and Sam, and a kingpin well beyond their level. Also, I feel like he's the most developed of all the villains of the series, because of all the screen time he gets. Artorias Colbrande from Tales of Berseria. He's another great example of a tragic villain, and I do like how his goals seem benevolent, if not for the way he wants to achieve them. A great personification of light not always meaning good. Penelope from Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. While the build-up could have been a little better, I ultimately do admire taking this direction with her, and I do think her getting to know the Cooper gang more personally made her a lot more threatening. Roger Reddens from Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice. I like how they don't make this guy seem overly sympathetic despite his motivation. In the end, he's exactly the kind of jerk I want to punch in the face and see brought to justice. And Girahim from The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Honestly made the best of the game's narrative for what he was given, and I mean in terms of how it contributes to the plot and not any of that. What? Oh, crap. Oh, crap!
You will know what true terror is.
Sephiroth is a character that at first I was interested in mostly based off what I heard and saw online, and guest appearances in places like Kingdom Hearts. When I really got to know Sephiroth, I became enamored with how intimidating, cold, and indomitable, yet hollow and tragic of a being he is. It's sad how the Sephiroth that constantly haunts Cloud was once a being who was powerful, but ultimately well-meaning, that was subjected to experiments and lied to by scientists into thinking he was chosen to, apparently, be a hybrid of a human and a supernatural being, and carry out the mission of Jenova, which is actually destroying the planet, not helping it. His mind was messed with many times into thinking exactly the wrong things, with all the cells of Jenova that were injected into him before he was born, and eventually losing his own sense of self, becoming a mere shell who knew nothing but destruction. But the Sephiroth that was born from this is a sentinel that barely flinches, and a being who truly brings out the fear in everyone. Sephiroth could just stand there and just look at someone without saying a word, and that could be enough to make them feel like something terrible will happen right there. Heck, even when he's off elsewhere, there's a feeling of uneasiness like he could literally just be around the corner and come out of nowhere, something that can be testified with Aerith. That's how strong his presence truly is, and when he does decide to speak, it feels like the mood of everything comes to a complete halt and all eyes are on him. I truly feel at his mercy when he does appear, but I can't help that with how domineering he truly is, he makes the overall story and world of Final Fantasy VII feel that much more complete. He's a foe whose strength isn't to be trifled with, and a great evil who you want to overcome, but feel so helpless against that doing so would be impossible. And yet, he's not completely one-dimensional either. The difference between who he was prior and who he is as we know is harrowing, yet ultimately fascinating, and even when I overcome him, even when I think he's gone, I always feel like he'll find a way back and try to bring the world to ruin all over again. Heck, it's implied that's how the timeline the remake series comes from was created. I enjoy watching him whenever he shows up, but at the same time, I always get the sense of fear when he does. If he can manage all that, then I think he deserves his popularity and this top spot. I'm Lightning Ripper. Special thanks to Bubba Hyde and an anonymous donor for their donations to my Play Life campaign, and whatever you do, don't give in to despair. See you all next time.
Sephiroth wins!